Okay, so hello everyone. Today's topic of the module is project brainstorming slash project management. I'm Ilma and I'll be delivering this module for Enhance. So let's start with project brainstorming slash management. Here I will kind of entail everything that goes into one project, what you should do before a project, how to deliver a project, how to think of a project at the end of the day, how to execute it, and manage your time well by doing it. So the first and foremost is coming up with a project idea. That can be one of the hardest things when it comes to projects and development of projects, just because of the sole fact that sometimes you're just lacking the inspiration to do so. Sometimes the idea comes itself, but sometimes it's the hardest thing in the world. What here comes to mind is research. So coming up with a project idea is usually tons and tons of research that you do in your own time. You kind of outline it on a paper and then you brainstorm what possibilities could you adjust, what could you change, so your project is not like a bunch of other projects, but it's a very individual and project that is kind of tailored to yourself. How to get inspired or how to think of a project idea. My main suggestions always have been to revisit or kind of see other or already existing EYP projects from previous physical and digital sessions, including trainings. When I say get inspired, I quite literally mean just get inspired by these. Do not steal or copy projects. First of all, that's not a nice thing to do. But second of all, I find it that you're never really proud and accomplished by your own work if it's someone else's, even if it's just, a simple redraw or something like that. You can never feel fully accomplished by it if it's not completely yours. But it's always allowed to get inspired by other people's ideas. So sometimes you can see a project and then it can take you to a completely different direction where you'll come up with your own idea and your own project, which will essentially be original. So get inspired, go out and look through these EYP projects. You will find something that might help you develop your own idea. We have Fiona entering. So the other kind of way to get inspired is by looking through the external projects of other NGOs and youth-based events. As I already said, do not copy it quite literally, just get inspired by these. The other NGOs I can recommend is Global Affairs Unit, ISEC, MUN. I'm not promoting any of these, but you can always look through their pages and their media output and maybe adapt it even to EYP because they are all advocating for active citizenship and involvement of the youth. The third way to get inspired is through the mainstream media, which is basically movies, music, documentaries, TV shows, newspaper, and etc. I think this one is pretty straightforward. Basically, there are tons of projects that you can do in the scope of media, and especially when you look through the kind of already traditional media. You can always make the session newspaper, you can make a session documentary. I don't think TV show and a movie is quite realistic, but maybe a short movie. Of course, music, if you are talented, you can write your own songs and get inspired that way. Also podcasts and maybe even like news shows, news reports of the session and stuff like that. So it's always nice to find some kind of inspiration in the mainstream media and adapt it to the more digital format of EYP today. Because in the old ages of physical EYP, we would really only focus mainly on photography and videography and kind of stayed in that little cluster of things for quite some time before Corona came, and kind of we all switched to this digital media, which somehow showed us that there are other forms of media, not just photography and videography. And of course, the last way to, well, not the last, but last point I have here is social media. And that is, of course, Pinterest, Tumblr, Reddit, Instagram, Flickr, almost any kind of social media, pretty much, where you can find photo inspiration, video inspiration, maybe not even directly copying it, maybe just, something that kind of urges you to think of your own idea. Maybe you'll find through Pinterest that you are interested in illustrations and you think you can do it. So, it's always good to find different ways to get inspired in any way possible. It doesn't really have to be the idea that it's based around. For example, if it's a TV show, it doesn't have to be a TV show. You can just be inspired by the TV show to create something. Going on to our next thing, we're going to talk about reasons and goals. And these are kind of 3 questions that I always ask myself before making a project. And this is kind of the next step in the making of a project. I always ask myself, what is the relevance of this project? How does this project relate to the session and the mission of EYP overall? By mission of EYP, I mean the promotion of youth engagement and active citizenship, of course, non-harassment policies, and just overall diversity and cultural gathering. To me, every project has to have some kind of relevance either to the session and the session motto or the mission of EYP in the general. Just because as cute as it is to make projects that are really fun, you should always know that the project stands for something in this network. And you should always be aware that there are people that are going to see these projects and, kind of gather the idea on EYP through the project. And I mean that by, I guess, sponsors, maybe some professional speakers, your mom. I don't know, your mom can see it and be like, oh, I don't want my kid in EYP if this is what they do in EYP. So always there has to be positive promotion of the messages of EYP. And of course, it has to have a relevance in the end of the day. The second thing is, what is the message of the project? What are you trying to showcase or say with this project? Is there an idea that you are trying to portray here? Is it, I guess, the motto of the session? Is it a message that the officials theme of the session are trying to convey? Anything on that matter? Just try to think behind the message that your project will send out to the network and other people, because as much as it represents the session, it also represents you as the individual, and people will look at you through that project and your abilities and your skills. And of course, how does it reflect on the network? When watching from an external point, does this reflect on the organization in a positive light? Meaning that the project should never really be about the negatives, always some, not the negatives of the organization. You should not promote a negative message overall. It should always promote positivity, cultural, I guess, cultures bringing each other together, engagement of the youth, and the overall EYP message kind of got brain lost there. Going on to the next slide, that is the medium. And when I say medium, we're talking about discovering the medium that you are most comfortable with. That would be, if you are most comfortable with videography, I suggest you go for videography. If you think you're more of an artist in the sense of illustrations, then you should go for illustrations. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you shouldn't explore and diversify yourself, but kind of keep that as a side thing instead of a project thing, because always you want to reflect yourself in the best light through the project that you're doing. And it's not that your other projects won't do that for you, but sometimes it does not work out for you, and then you end up stressed without a project, missing all the deadlines. So I always suggest keep your main medium, your main project, and maybe try a project on the side with a medium you're trying to explore. Of course, always come to the editor and the editorial team for help. They will be the ones who help you the most when it comes to developing your skills in the more techie aspects. Um, Going on to the next slide is, of course, the planning of the visuals. So in the planning of the visuals, whether it's a design, video, photography, podcast, or whatever, you should always first choose some main elements of what it's going to have. Um, for example, for me, that's always color palette, font, editing style, and layouting. The reason why I put color palette and font and editing style, it's because even if you think about podcasts, you will not just upload that measly audio clip on Spotify and call it a day. There always has to be a design. There always has to be a thumbnail which will draw people in. So you will, at the end of the day, always have to resort to some kind of a design, either to put it as a cover of your project or as a project itself. So for me, it's always important to plan your visuals. The color palette, I would usually always go for the session colors. If not session colors, just use the standard EYP colors. When it comes to fonts, pretty much, yeah, the same, the font of the session. And yeah, that's pretty much it. When you come to the next slide, is the next advice I have is for you to follow the MTM toolkit, something that can be found on the EYP network website or your members platform. And this is basically a kit that outlines all of the duties that media team has and what they should do, basically the do's and the don'ts of EYP media. Now, in the later module, kind of Lizia will go over these things a little bit in depth. So you will already kind of gain the knowledge through that. And I will go through the communications within EYP in our next module. So yeah, that's also going to be pretty much explaining the MTM toolkit in a sense. And now we get to project management. Usually when you try to manage a project, this is something that your editor or your buddy group will do. I don't personally myself, just because I can communicate and I like the individualistic approach when it comes to journalists, which means speaking to every journalist themselves. But there is something called a project management sheet, and I do this for myself, and I think everyone should do this, even when it comes to work, school, or whatever. In the project management sheet for a media team member, usually you should find the name of the media team member, the name of the project, the explanation of the project, and then the most optimistic deadline that you can give yourself. So not given one by the editor, you are giving yourself a deadline here. And for example, you are doing a project that is a video project. It's about the officials and how they spend their time at the session. You will name the project, outline the project, and then lastly, you'll, for example, say, I need 2 days after the session to finish this, and then it will be ready for posting. Now, I'm not saying that this deadline is set in stone, but you should stick to it as much as you possibly can, because that kind of already helps plan the output of the session. Then, of course, checking up with the editorial team, checking up for help. Feedback. Feedback is very, very important. And you should always ask for it when you are developing your projects, even when you have just an idea. Go speak to your editorial assistants and, of course, the editor. Kind of go through them to kind of check your idea. I promise you, there will always be something that they tell you, and you'll go like, oh my God, yes, that's exactly what I needed to finalize this project. That was the last missing piece. So I suggest, yes, please check up with the editorial team. Then, of course, set realistic goals and timelines, as I already said. the deadline that you put for yourself, it does not have to be set in stone. You can always extend it a little bit or even shorten it, which is even better. But be realistic about it. Do not push yourself in a sense of, if you have a really, really lengthy and a kind of tech-based project, do not force yourself to finish it in the next 15 hours, because you won't be able to. You will be stressed, and don't promise something you cannot deliver. Also start earlier if it's that kind of complicated, but also don't overuse that kindness of the editor and be like, oh, I'll finish this project 3 months after the session. That's not working out for anyone. And of course, I already kind of mentioned this, and that is ask for help/feedback. Now, when it comes to help and feedback, you do not always have to rely only on the editorial team. You can, of course, ask your fellow journalists. You can talk to them, brainstorm together, come up with even joint projects, but do not be afraid to ask for help or someone to tell you their opinion on the project. Of course, at the end of the day, you should know the best when it comes to your project, but do not hesitate to ask for help. Like, two minds are always better than one. And for the last thing is a Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Need some clarifications? Or everything is pretty much okay? Okay, and with the deafening silence, I'm gonna stop recording this module, and we're kind of gonna discuss about our next one. So yeah, thank you for listening to Project Management and Brainstorming.
Thanks.